The morning sun poured through the towering glass facade of Ventura Capital Bank, its rays bouncing off the polished marble floors. Elena Marquez stepped inside, her heels clicking sharply with every step. Sound cut through the quiet hum of the bank, commanding attention. She clutched a thick folder close to her chest, the culmination of sleepless nights and relentless work. Today was supposed to mark the beginning of something extraordinary. The receptionist greeted her with a mechanical smile. "Good morning, Miss Marquez. Mr. Thornton is expecting you. Please, this way." Elena nodded, her confidence unwavering, though inside her nerves simmered. She had walked into this bank not as another hopeful entrepreneur, but as a visionary. Her company, Soluna Energy, was designed to bring affordable, renewable energy to underserved communities. It wasn't just a business, it was a mission. As she was escorted to Philip Thornton's office, she felt the weight of a few lingering stares. Elena was used to it, being a woman in finance. Being a woman in finance, being Latina, being bold. But today, she didn't flinch. Today, she wasn't going to be defined by anyone's assumptions. Philip Thornton sat behind an imposing mahogany desk, his silver-rimmed glasses perched on the edge of his nose. He rose to shake her hand, the gesture polite but perfunctory. "Miss Marquez," he said, his voice smooth but distant. "Please, have a seat." Elena smiled, sitting down as she carefully placed her folder on his desk. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Thornton. I believe what I'm about to share will excite you." She dove into her pitch with passion. Her voice carried the weight of her conviction as she laid out the details, the projections, the partnerships she had secured, and the communities that would benefit. She gestured to charts and diagrams, her words painting a future of sustainable energy and opportunity. But as she spoke, Thornton leaned back in his chair, his expression unchanging. The polite nods felt rehearsed, the occasional hum hollow. When Elena finished, she paused, searching his face for a glimmer of interest. Instead, Thornton cleared his throat and removed his glasses. "Miss Marquez," he began, his tone measured. "Your proposal is certainly ambitious, but I'm afraid it doesn't align with the type of projects our bank is prepared to support." Elena blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry. I don't understand. The projections show steady growth. I've mitigated the risks with a diversified strategy." And Thornton raised a hand, cutting her off. "It's not about the numbers," he said. "It's about the fit. Your venture, while admirable, carries significant uncertainties. Our clients expect a more traditional approach." His words hung in the air, but Elena heard what he wasn't saying. She'd seen this dismissal before. It wasn't about the numbers. It was about her background, her vision, her audacity to challenge the norm. Elena's jaw tightened. She wanted to demand an explanation, to call out the quiet prejudice hiding behind his corporate demeanor. But instead, she straightened her spine and smiled, a steel edge in her expression. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Thornton," she said evenly. Gathering her folder, she stood and walked out of his office with her head held high. Thornton's dismissive smirk burned in her memory, but she didn't let it show. She stepped into the crisp morning air, her heart pounding but her resolve solidifying. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she had hoped she wouldn't need. A deep voice answered after the first ring. "Elena," it greeted warmly. "Is everything all right?" Her reply was steady, unshaken. "Thornton denied the loan," she said. "Just as we predicted." The voice on the other end chuckled darkly, and Elena's lips curved into a small, determined smile. We move forward with the acquisition. She ended the call and looked up at the grand facade of Ventura Capital Bank. Thornton might have dismissed her as another underdog chasing an impossible dream, but he had made one critical mistake. He underestimated her. If you've enjoyed the start of Elena's powerful journey and are curious about how she'll turn the tables, make sure to subscribe to Elderly Wisdom. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you inspiring stories like this, of perseverance, grit, and the triumph of human spirit. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment of wisdom that could change your perspective. Let's continue this journey together, because the best is yet to come. Elena spent the next few days buried in meetings and phone calls, her determination growing with each passing hour. If the bank wouldn't believe in her vision, then she'd take control of it. The plan had been in place for months, a contingency she had crafted after too many doors had been closed on her simply because she didn't fit the mold. Thornton's rejection wasn't an obstacle, it was a trigger. Late one evening, she sat in her home office, papers spread across her desk like a battlefield map. The acquisition process was already well underway. Her strategic partners, investors, who saw not just her potential, but the inevitability of her success, had been preparing for this moment alongside her. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Marco, her financial advisor and closest confidant. Final approval from the board expected by Friday. Everything is on track. Elena stared at the words for a moment, her chest tightening, not with fear, but with the weight of what was about to unfold. She typed back a single line, "Let's make history." Following Friday morning, Elena walked into Ventura Capital Bank with a calm resolve that belied the storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. The lobby hummed with the usual buzz of activity, but today, the air felt charged. Thornton was in his office, as oblivious as ever, when his assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, there's someone here to see you," she said, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "Miss Marquez." Thornton frowned, glancing at his watch. He hadn't expected to see her again so soon. With a dismissive wave, he said, "Send her in." Elena entered with measured steps, her expression calm, almost polite. Thornton gestured to the chair across from him. "Miss Marquez," he began, leaning back in his chair. "I assumed our last conversation was conclusive. What brings you back?" Elena remained standing, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. "I thought it would be appropriate to inform you of some developments personally," she said. Thornton raised an eyebrow. "Developments?" She placed a single folder on his desk, its edges perfectly aligned with the corner. "As of this morning," Elena said, her voice steady, "I am the majority shareholder in Ventura Capital Bank." Thornton's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Elena continued, her tone sharpening. "I own this bank, and as the new majority shareholder, I'm here to ensure that its future aligns with values of integrity, vision, and community. Qualities you seem to lack." Thornton's mouth opened, but no words came out. His face drained of color as he reached for the folder, flipping through the documents inside. Each page confirmed the reality he hadn't seen coming. He looked up at her, his voice thin. This is impossible." "No," Elena said, leaning forward slightly. "What's impossible is the fact that you've been allowed to sit in that chair for as long as you have. But that ends today." Thornton sputtered, his polished demeanor crumbling. "You can't do this." Elena cut him off. Your resignation will be on my desk by the end of the day. Consider this a courtesy. If you choose to make this difficult, I'll happily let the board review your record of mismanagement and the complaints that have piled up under your leadership. Shall I go on? Thornton slumped back into his chair, his protests dying on his lips. The weight of her words left no room for argument. As Elena exited Thornton's office, the tension in the bank was palpable. Employees who had watched her walk in now whispered among themselves, their curiosity electric. Elena didn't stop to acknowledge them. Instead, she walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. Her next meeting was with the regional director, a man who had allowed Thornton's unchecked reign to continue. This was no longer just about reclaiming her dignity or even building her business. This was about reshaping an institution that had lost its way. When the elevator doors closed, Elena caught her reflection in the polished surface. Her expression was fierce, unyielding. This was her moment, not just to prove Thornton wrong, but to redefine what leadership looked like. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the top floor. Elena straightened her blazer and stepped forward. A quiet storm, ready to dismantle and rebuild everything in her path. Elena stepped into the regional director's office, her presence commanding even in the silence of the room. The glass walls revealed the bustling bank below, employees darting between desks, unaware of the seismic shift unfolding above their heads. Jonathan Mercer, the regional director, rose from his chair, his demeanor polished but cautious. "Elena Marquez," he said, extending a hand. Elena shook his hand firmly, her gaze steady. "And I about you, Mr. Mercer. Let's not waste time. We both know why I'm here." Mercer gestured to a seat across from him. "By all means, let's talk." Elena didn't sit. Instead, she placed a folder on his desk, identical to the one Thornton had barely managed to process. "I'm not here to ask for favors," she said. "I'm here to inform you of the changes this institution will undergo." Mercer hesitated, his hand hovering over the folder. He opened it and skimmed the contents, his brows furrowing. After a moment, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "You're serious about this?" "Deadly serious," Elena replied, her voice unwavering. "This bank has potential, but for too long, it's been shackled by outdated practices and unethical leadership. I've taken control to change that." Mercer leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "And what exactly do you intend to do?" "The vision." Elena began to outline her plan, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of fierce determination. "This bank will no longer cater solely to the elite while dismissing those who truly need opportunity. We'll restructure our loan approval processes to prioritize innovation and potential. We'll reinvest in the communities we serve, offering mentorship and resources to underrepresented entrepreneurs." Mercer raised an eyebrow. "Ambitious. But you're asking for a complete cultural overhaul." "I'm not asking," Elena said, her tone sharp. "I'm leading it. And let me be clear. There's no room for resistance. Every person who aligns with this vision will have my full support. But anyone who clings to the old ways, they're out." Mercer studied her, his skepticism slowly melting into something resembling respect. "You're not here to play games." "No, Mr. Mercer," Elena said, stepping closer. The unveiling. By the time Elena left Mercer's office, the weight of her authority had shifted the atmosphere of the bank. Word of her ownership spread quickly, rippling through every department like an unstoppable wave. Employees whispered, unsure whether to feel fear or hope. That afternoon, Elena gathered the entire staff in the conference room. The space was packed with uneasy faces, from tellers to senior managers. Some glanced nervously at each other. Others avoided her gaze altogether. But Elena stood tall, her voice steady as she addressed the room. "I'm sure you've all heard the news by now," she began, her tone commanding attention. "I am the new majority shareholder of Ventura Capital Bank. What you may not know is why." She let the silence hang for a moment, her eyes sweeping across the room. For too long, this institution has failed to live up to its potential. Clients have been dismissed without cause. Employees have been overlooked. And leadership has chosen complacency over accountability. The room was silent, save for the occasional shuffle of uneasy feet. Elena continued, her voice softening but remaining firm. "That changes today. This is no longer just a bank. It's a partner in progress. For our clients, our communities, and each of you. The resistance." As Elena left the meeting, Michael, a junior banker, rushed to her side. His face was flushed with emotion. "Miss Marquez," he began hesitantly, "I just wanted to say thank you for what you said in there." Elena smiled warmly. "Call me Elena, Michael. And thank you for believing in this." Michael nodded, his confidence bolstered. But as he walked away, another employee lingered in the corner of her eye, a middle-aged man with crossed arms and a scowl etched deep into his face. As Elena met his gaze, he turned sharply and disappeared into the crowd, a shadow of the past. Later that evening, as Elena reviewed the preliminary audit reports, an envelope was slid under her office door. Curious, she picked it up, the paper crinkling in her hands. Inside was a single note, written in hurried, uneven script. "You don't know what you're digging into. Leave it alone before it's too late." Elena's breath caught for a moment. Her instincts told her this was more than an idle threat. It was a warning, a glimpse into the resistance lurking beneath the surface of her revolution. She locked the note in her drawer, her resolve hardening. They didn't know who they were dealing with. The turning point. The following day, Elena met with Carter, the head of legal compliance, to discuss the findings from the audit. His face was grim as he handed her a stack of documents. "It's worse than we thought," Carter said. "Thornton wasn't acting alone. Several mid-level managers were complicit in approving fraudulent loans and diverting funds into personal accounts." Elena's jaw tightened. "Do we have proof?" "Enough to take action," Carter replied. "But it's going to get messy." Elena looked at the names on the list, people who had smiled in her direction, who had shaken her hand just hours earlier. She felt a pang of betrayal, but quickly replaced it with determination. "Schedule individual meetings with each of them," she said, "and ensure security is present." A promise to keep. That evening, as the city lights glimmered outside her window, Elena sat alone in her office. She thought of the people counting on her, the communities she was determined to uplift, the employees who had begun to believe in her vision. She thought of the note, the warning that tried to shake her resolve. Elena leaned back in her chair, her gaze unwavering. Change wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but it was necessary. This was no longer about proving Thornton wrong or even about the bank itself. This was about showing everyone, from the doubters to the dreamers, that integrity and strength could reshape even the most broken systems. As she turned off her desk lamp and prepared to leave, one thought echoed in her mind. "I will not fail, not for me, not for them." Following morning, the air inside Ventura Capital Bank felt heavier. Rumors of an impending shakeup spread like wildfire, and Elena could feel the tension radiating from every corner. She had spent the night preparing, combing through every detail of the reports Carter had provided. The corruption she uncovered wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a direct attack on the very principles she was fighting to instill. She walked into her office at 8, Zero, sharp, her expression calm but unyielding. Carter was already waiting, a thick folder in his hands. "All set?" he asked. Elena nodded. "Bring them in." The confrontations. One by one, the managers implicated in the fraud entered her office. Each meeting was swift, decisive, and unflinchingly direct. First manager, a man in his late 40s with a self-assured air, tried to deflect. "This must be some kind of misunderstanding," he said, sweat pooling at his temple. "I was following Thornton's orders. I didn't have a choice." Elena leaned forward, her voice steady but cold. "You always have a choice. And you chose greed over integrity. That ends here." The second manager tried a different tactic, breaking into desperate pleas. "Please, Miss Marquez, I have a family to support." "If I lose this job—" Elena cut him off, her tone unwavering. "Your actions hurt families who trusted this bank. I will not let your choices taint the future we're building." By the time the final manager sat down, a woman who had remained stone-faced through the entire process, the atmosphere in the bank had shifted. Word of the firings had spread, and employees were bracing themselves for the fallout. "I hope you know what you're doing," the woman said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're shaking the foundations of something bigger than you realize." Elena met her gaze without blinking. "Good," she said, "because those foundations were rotten." Addressing the staff. With the firings complete, Elena called an emergency all-staff meeting. The conference room was packed with employees, their faces a mix of fear, curiosity, and tentative hope. Michael stood near the back, his hands clasped tightly as he watched her step to the front. Elena took a deep breath and began. "Today marks a turning point for this bank. As many of you know, we've uncovered serious misconduct. Actions that betrayed the trust of our clients and tarnished the reputation of this institution." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. "The individuals responsible have been removed, and we are cooperating with authorities to ensure justice is served. But this is only the beginning." Her voice softened, but her determination remained clear. "I know change is difficult. I know some of you may feel uncertain about what's ahead. But let me assure you, this is not just about cleaning up the past. It's about building a future where integrity and fairness are at the heart of everything we do." The room was silent, save for the quiet shuffling of feet. Then Michael raised his hand. "Miss Marquez," Elena, he corrected himself. "What does this mean for us? For the people who believe in what you're trying to do?" Elena smiled, her expression warm but resolute. "It means you have my trust, and I hope I can earn yours in return. Together, we're going to rebuild this bank, not as a relic of the past, but as a partner for the future." A ripple of cautious applause spread through the room, growing louder as more employees joined in. It wasn't unanimous, but it was a start. A glimmer of hope. That evening, as Elena walked through the nearly empty halls of the bank, she passed Michael near the break room. He hesitated before speaking. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not just fixing things, but for believing we can be better." Elena stopped and turned to him, her expression softening. "The future of this bank isn't just about policies or numbers, Michael. It's about people like you. Don't ever forget that." As he nodded and walked away, Elena felt the first glimmer of hope break through the weight of the day. The journey ahead was daunting, but for the first time, she saw the seeds of something new. A culture of accountability, respect, and ambition. Elena returned to her office, looking out at the city lights. The note of warning she'd received still lingered in her mind, but she refused to let it overshadow her resolve. Change was never easy, but it was always worth it. She picked up her pen and began drafting a plan for the next phase of her vision. Her movements were precise, deliberate, and filled with purpose. This wasn't the end of the battle, only the beginning. The week after the firings, the bank was a hive of nervous energy. Employees whispered in hushed tones, wondering what would come next. Elena's decisive actions had left no doubt that she meant business. But now came the hardest part. Not just rooting out corruption, but replacing it with something stronger, something lasting. The mentorship program. Early Monday morning, the first initiative of Elena's vision was launched. The bank's largest conference room had been transformed into a workshop space, bustling with young entrepreneurs, high school students, and community leaders. Banners lining the walls bore the bank's new mission statement: building together, growing together. Michael stood at the front of the room, his voice confident as he introduced the mentorship program. He had grown into his new role with a determination that mirrored Elena's, pouring his heart into making this program a success. Elena stood at the back, watching him with quiet pride. As Michael walked the attendees through the basics of financial literacy, networking, and loan opportunities, Elena felt a spark of hope. This was what the bank was meant to be: a resource, a partner, a force for good. During a break, Michael approached her, his face glowing with excitement. "The turnout is better than we expected," he said. "People are actually excited about what we're doing." Elena nodded, her smile soft but resolute. "It's a start. But this program isn't just about teaching skills. It's about showing people that they matter, that this bank believes in them." Michael hesitated, then said, "They believe in you, Elena." Her heart swelled at his words, but she quickly tempered the emotion. "Belief is earned, Michael, and we've still got work to do." The threat revealed. Later that evening, Elena returned to her office, ready to finalize the next phase of her plans. But as she sifted through the day's reports, her phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line was stark: "You've gone too far." Her breath caught as she read the message: "This bank doesn't belong to you. Stay out of what you don't understand, or you'll regret it." The words were chilling in their simplicity, but Elena's fear quickly turned to anger. Whoever had sent this was more than a disgruntled employee. They were someone with something to lose, and that meant she was on the right track. She forwarded the email to Carter with a brief note: "Trace this." Within minutes, Carter called. "This is serious," he said, his voice tight. "Do you want security involved?" "Not yet," Elena replied. "But I want answers. If someone thinks they can scare me into silence, they're about to learn how wrong they are." A meeting with the community. Following day, Elena hosted a town hall in the bank's main branch. The room was packed with clients, community leaders, and small business owners, many of whom had been wary of the bank for years. Elena stood at the front, her shoulders squared and her voice steady. "Thank you for coming," she began. "I know many of you have questions about what's happening here, about what this bank stands for, and about whether you can trust us again." She paused, meeting the eyes of the crowd. "Let me be clear. The practices of the past have no place in our future. This bank isn't just under new leadership. It's under a new mission. We are here to serve you, to invest in your dreams, and to ensure that every client, no matter their background, is given a fair shot." A man in the front row raised his hand. "Miss Marquez, I've applied for loans here 3 times, and I've been turned down every time. What's different now?" Elena stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "What's different is that we're changing how we evaluate potential. Your ideas will be judged on their merit, not on who you know or where you come from. I can't promise every loan will be approved, but I can promise you this: you will always be treated with respect." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment the room was silent. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the crowd. It wasn't unanimous, but it was genuine, a quiet victory. That evening, as the building emptied, Elena walked through the silent halls of the bank. She stopped in the lobby, looking up at the grand facade she had once seen as an outsider. Now, it was hers. But it wasn't the ownership that mattered. Michael appeared by her side, carrying a stack of feedback forms from the mentorship program. "People loved it," he said, grinning. "They're asking when the next session is." Elena smiled, her exhaustion melting away for a brief moment. "Good. Let's make it even better next time." As Michael walked away, Elena lingered in the quiet, her thoughts racing. The threat, the resistance, the weight of leading this revolution. It was all heavy, but the spark she had seen in that room tonight reminded her why she couldn't stop now. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope that this wasn't just a battle to win. It was a future to build, and she wasn't alone. The discovery. The next morning, Elena's office was bathed in golden light, but the tension in her chest made it feel anything but warm. She sat across from Carter, who had just arrived with the results of his investigation into the anonymous threats. Carter placed a thin folder on her desk, his expression grim. "We traced the email," he said. "It came from an internal account." Elena stiffened. "Someone inside the bank?" He nodded. "One of the managers you dismissed, a former ally of Thornton. But there's more." He hesitated, as though weighing how much to reveal. "Out with it, Carter," Elena urged. Carter took a deep breath. "We've also uncovered a connection between Thornton and a private investment group. It looks like he wasn't just approving fraudulent loans. He was funneling money through those accounts to fund external ventures. And some of the people in that group still have influence here." Elena's grip on her chair tightened. "Are you saying there's more resistance inside the bank?" "Potentially," Carter admitted. "But we can't confirm how far it goes." Yet, the weight of his words hung in the air, but Elena's resolve only solidified. "Then we find out," she said, "and we fix it. All of it. The betrayal." By midday, Elena's newfound sense of control was tested yet again. An anonymous tip came in through the bank's whistleblower hotline, accusing a senior department head of burying evidence of Thornton's misdeeds. Elena wasted no time. She summoned the accused, a woman named Margaret Sloan. Margaret entered, her usual composed demeanor giving way to thinly veiled nervousness. "You wanted to see me, Miss Marquez?" Elena gestured to the chair across from her desk, but didn't sit herself. Instead, she leaned against the edge of the desk, arms crossed, her eyes locked on Margaret. "I received a report this morning," she began. "It accuses you of suppressing complaints against Thornton." Margaret's eyes flickered, but her voice remained steady. "That's absurd. I've always followed protocol." "Stop," Elena cut in, her tone sharp. "I have documentation here that says otherwise. Multiple complaints about Thornton's practices were filed directly with your office. Not one of them made it to the board." Margaret's face turned pale. I was following orders. Thornton made it clear that raising those issues would only damage the bank's reputation. I thought I was protecting us." Elena's expression hardened. "Protecting who?" "The clients who were denied fairness. The employees who were silenced. Or yourself." Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but Elena shook her head. You had a choice, Margaret, and you chose wrong. Effective immediately, you're relieved of your duties. The ripple effect. The removal of Margaret sent another shockwave through the bank. Employees who had been skeptical of Elena's leadership now saw the depth of her commitment to rooting out corruption. Whispers turned into quiet admiration, and even the most cynical staff began to reconsider their stance. Michael found Elena in the break room later that afternoon, his face a mix of concern and pride. You're not pulling any punches, he said. Elena poured herself a cup of coffee, her movements deliberate. I don't have the luxury of playing it safe, Michael. If we don't fix this, the bank crumbles. And with it, everything we're trying to build. Michael nodded, his admiration evident. Well, for what it's worth, you've got more people believing in you than you think. The community rally. That evening, Elena hosted a second town hall, this time specifically for small business owners and community leaders who had long felt overlooked by the bank. The room was packed, the energy electric. Elena stood at the podium, scanning the crowd. Thank you all for being here, she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I know many of you have been let down by this bank in the past. And for that, I'm sorry, but I'm not here to dwell on what's been done. I'm here to show you what we're building. She outlined the mentorship programs, the new loan criteria, and the community outreach initiatives. She spoke not as a banker, but as someone who understood their struggles, their dreams, their fears. A man in the back raised his hand. How do we know this isn't just talk? We've heard promises before. Elena stepped away from the podium, walking toward him as she answered. Because I don't make promises I can't keep, she said. And if you ever feel this bank isn't living up to its word, you can come to me directly. My door is always open. The man nodded slowly, and the room erupted into applause, a glimmer of redemption. That night, as Elena sat in her office, Carter walked in with an update. The accounts tied to Thornton's group have been frozen. Legal's building a case, and the authorities are involved. Elena leaned back, a rare moment of relief washing over her. Good. It's time we close that chapter. Carter hesitated. There's one more thing, he said, his voice softer. The employees. They're starting to rally behind you. Even the ones who doubted you at first. Elena smiled faintly. That's not about me, Carter. It's about showing them what's possible when you lead with purpose. The dawn of something new. As the days turned into weeks, the bank began to transform. Employees walked taller, their trust in leadership slowly rebuilding. Clients returned, intrigued by the bank's new mission, and the programs Elena had launched started bearing fruit, with dozens of small businesses finally getting the support they needed. One evening, as she looked out over the city from her office, Michael walked in with a framed photo. Thought you might like this, he said, placing it on her desk. It was a picture from the mentorship program's launch, a group of bright-eyed entrepreneurs standing proudly in front of the bank's banner. Elena's chest tightened with emotion. Thank you, Michael, she said softly. As he left, she turned the photo toward her, letting it anchor her resolve. She wasn't just fixing a broken system. She was building something entirely new, and she wasn't done yet. The ripple of change. Weeks passed, and the transformation at Ventura Capital Bank was undeniable. Employees who once walked on eggshells now moved with a quiet confidence, buoyed by the transparency and fairness that Elena had instilled. Clients began to return, drawn by the bank's renewed focus on innovation and community. Elena sat in her office one late evening, reviewing reports from the mentorship program and the newly approved small business loans. Each number, each success story, felt like a step closer to the vision she had carried for so long. Yet, the lingering shadows of Thornton's corruption and the anonymous threats refused to fully dissipate. As she closed her laptop, her phone buzzed with a text from Carter. "We've uncovered something. You need to see this. The final piece." The next morning, Elena met Carter in the conference room, the blinds drawn for privacy. On the table was a stack of documents thicker than any she'd seen throughout the investigation. Carter's expression was grim. "We've traced the funds Thornton funneled out of the bank. It's bigger than we thought." Elena flipped through the pages, her stomach sinking as the scope of the fraud became clear. Thornton had used the bank as a personal piggy bank, channeling millions into offshore accounts and questionable investments. But what chilled her most was the list of names tied to the scheme. Figures from powerful companies and even local officials. "It wasn't just him," Carter said quietly. "He had backing. And some of those names, they're still watching." Elena clenched her jaw. "This can't stay buried." "It won't," Carter assured her. "But going public with this will bring heat, Elena. These aren't people who let this slide." She met his gaze, her resolve unwavering. "Let them come. I'm not here to protect myself. I'm here to make this right." The public reckoning. 2 days later, Elena stood at a press conference organized in the bank's grand lobby. Cameras flashed, reporters murmured, and community members filled every available seat. This wasn't just a public statement. It was a declaration. Elena stepped up to the podium, her heart steady despite the weight of the moment. "Thank you for being here," she began. "Today, I want to speak not only as the leader of Ventura Capital Bank, but as someone who understands what it means to fight for fairness." She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room. "When I took over this bank, I knew there would be challenges. What I didn't expect was the depth of the betrayal I would uncover. Betrayal not just of this institution, but of the clients and communities it was meant to serve." Her voice hardened. "We have uncovered a years-long scheme of fraud led by the bank's former leadership and involving individuals from outside this institution. Millions were stolen, trust was broken, and lives were impacted. That stops today." The room buzzed as reporters scrambled to take notes. Elena continued, her tone unyielding. "The individuals responsible will be held accountable. We have provided all evidence to the authorities and are cooperating fully in the ongoing investigation. This bank will no longer be a place where corruption thrives." As she finished, a reporter stood, her pen poised. "Miss Marquez, do you believe this will restore trust in the bank?" Elena met the reporter's gaze. "Trust isn't restored with words. It's rebuilt with actions. And that's exactly what we're doing." The applause that followed was hesitant at first, but it grew, echoing through the grand lobby, a glimpse of the future. That evening, Elena returned to her office, exhausted but resolute. She stared out the window, the city lights twinkling like stars against the dark canvas of the skyline. She thought of everything she'd faced, the doubts, the resistance, the threats. It had all led to this moment, and she wasn't done yet. A soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Michael, holding a folder. "Miss Marquez," he said, stepping inside. "I thought you'd like to see this." Elena opened the folder and found a series of testimonials from the mentorship program. Small business owners, students, and community leaders had written about how the bank's support had changed their lives. One letter caught her eye. A high school senior thanking the bank for a scholarship that would allow him to attend college. Elena smiled, her throat tightening with emotion. "Thank you, Michael. This is why we do it." Michael nodded, his voice quiet. "We believe in you, Elena, and we're ready to keep building a new chapter." The next day, Elena called an all-staff meeting. The energy in the room was different, lighter, more hopeful. Employees who had once avoided eye contact now sat forward, eager to hear what she had to say. Elena stood at the front, her hands resting lightly on the podium. "We've been through a lot together," she began, "and we've uncovered hard truths about what this institution once was. But today I want to talk about what it can be." Her gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of each employee. This isn't just a bank. It's a place where dreams are nurtured, where integrity is non-negotiable, and where every single one of you has a role in shaping the future. "We've done good work, but there's so much more ahead." Bloom erupted into applause, louder than anything she'd heard before. Elena felt a swell of pride, not in herself, but in them. They were no longer just employees. They were believers. The legacy begins. That night, as Elena walked through the quiet halls of the bank, she felt the weight of everything she'd built and everything she had yet to achieve. The battles she had fought weren't just about a bank. They were about rewriting what leadership meant, about proving that integrity and ambition could coexist. Standing at her office window, she whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." And she believed it. The culmination. Months after the press conference, Ventura Capital Bank had undergone a metamorphosis. The mentorship programs flourished, small business loans doubled, and a sense of pride permeated the bank's walls. The institution, once marred by scandal, now stood as a beacon of innovation and integrity. Elena sat in her office, reviewing the latest quarterly reports. The numbers were promising. Increased community engagement, a surge in new accounts, and a record high employee satisfaction rate. Yet, she knew this transformation wasn't captured in spreadsheets. It was in the trust she saw in her employees' eyes, the gratitude expressed by clients, and the stories of lives changed. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Michael entered, holding a binder. "The final report on the mentorship program," he said, handing it to her. "You're going to want to see this." Elena opened the binder and scanned the testimonials. One stood out, a letter from a single mother who had secured a loan to expand her small bakery. Her business was now thriving, and she employed 5 other women in her neighborhood. The last line of the letter read, "Thank you for believing in us when no one else would." Elena's throat tightened. "This," she said softly, "is why we fight." Michael smiled. "And this is why we follow you." The unexpected visitor. That afternoon, Elena received a surprise visitor. An older man in a tailored suit, his demeanor calm but his eyes sharp. He introduced himself as a senior representative from the Banking Regulatory Board. "Miss Marquez," he began, taking a seat. "Your leadership has caught our attention. Few institutions recover from scandals like the one Ventura faced, and even fewer emerge stronger. You've done something remarkable." Elena thanked him, her tone measured. "But I suspect this isn't just a courtesy visit." Then smiled faintly. "It's not. We're considering adopting some of your bank's new policies as best practices for the industry. Specifically, your approach to community engagement and transparency. Would you be willing to consult on a national initiative?" The weight of his words settled over her, but Elena felt no hesitation. If it means creating a fairer system for everyone, I'm in. The celebration. A week later, Ventura Capital hosted a celebration for employees and clients alike. The bank's lobby, once a cold and impersonal space, was transformed into a vibrant gathering place filled with laughter and shared stories. Elena stood on a small stage, a microphone in hand, as she addressed the crowd. "This isn't about me," she began, her voice steady but warm. "This is about all of us, employees, clients, and community members, who refuse to settle for anything less than excellence. Together, we've proven that integrity isn't a weakness. It's our greatest strength." The crowd erupted into applause, and Elena felt a swell of emotion she hadn't allowed herself before. For the first time, she let herself feel the weight of what they had accomplished, and the hope for what was still to come. A quiet moment. As the celebration wound down, Elena slipped away to her office. The noise faded behind her, replaced by the hum of the city outside her window. She looked at the framed photo Michael had given her months ago, a symbol of everything they had built. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carter. "You've done it. Be proud." Elena smiled, setting the phone down. She was proud, not just of the bank's transformation, but of the people who had made it possible. People like Michael, Carter, and the clients who had trusted her vision. The legacy begins. Elena knew the journey wasn't over. There would be new challenges, new battles, and new skeptics. But for the first time, she felt ready, not just to lead, but to inspire. She whispered to herself, "This isn't the end. It's the foundation." And with that, Elena turned off the lights, the quiet strength of her legacy echoing through the bank's walls.